In 2021, I made what felt like a huge decision in my architectural career. I was just 27 years old and decided to leave my role as architect in corporate practice to set up my own design studio. I was just really unhappy in corporate practice, which is not necessarily a reflection of the practice I was working for, but just the nature I felt of bigger business. I was doing long commutes, lots of unpaid overtime, and had a relatively low salary for what felt like a high responsibility. But most significantly, I felt under threat from regular redundancy rounds that put the whole idea of a secure job into question. This really made me think that the biggest fear that was stopping me from actually setting up my own studio was the idea of losing any level of security in my job or my income. But actually, during the pandemic and immediately afterwards, the whole idea of a secure job was turned on its head, and I felt like, why not just give it a go? So for the past 2.5 years, I've been running my own design studio from my spare bedroom. You may have seen on my Instagram this one angle of my studio space many times, and that's pretty intentional actually, because if you just pan slightly to the right-hand side, I have a wardrobe full of my family's clothes. And if you pan to the left-hand side, there's my wife's desk where she works right behind me. So we're really on top of each other. It's a pretty cramped space to be working from. But there's no doubt there's benefits to the home office, right? It's almost the antidote to what I was unhappy with in corporate practice. For instance, there is no commute. My commute is no longer 2 hours in the car or on a train. It's just several steps from my bedroom, and this is definitely buys back time and energy. But also, if you have a home office, you're not spending money on rent. Your overheads are pretty lean, which as a new practice is great. It means you can be flexible and experimental and don't have to worry about paying too many bills every month. But also, having done this for 2.5 years now, it has many disadvantages as well, as I'm sure many of you experience in your own lives. Firstly, it's really challenging to separate work and life, and that's become a real difficult issue for me. I have a young family and my wife works from home also, and it can be distracting. Also, significantly, it's really awkward to run client meetings from your own house. Something just feels unprofessional about it. Unless you have a very good garden studio, for example, it's difficult to not cross over some private things as you move through your home to get to your office. Probably most significantly to me, actually, is that it just feels very constraining now. I don't feel like I can make models and experiment with the working methods I enjoy the most as an architect. I just feel stifled by operating from one desk with minimal workspace. And it's starting to affect, I feel, the quality of architecture I'm able to create out of my studio. So it's definitely time for a change. I feel so fortunate to even be able to say that. It's a reflection on how my practice has grown, and I'm able to take on the additional overhead, which I'm incredibly thankful for. So having made this decision, I've been trawling through commercial property websites for a couple of months, just trying to find something that felt appropriate and felt like it aligned with the type of space I wanted to work in and my brand. A lot of the properties online were very expensive for poor quality space. They might have been, the types of spaces like cubicles in a larger office or smaller rooms with minimal natural light in a business park. The types of spaces I just couldn't imagine working from as a creative. And ideally, I wanted a space that aligned with my practice ethos, which is the adaptive reuse of existing and old buildings. So it would be great if I could find something that was a space within that type of building. And after a couple of months of looking, I did think that just wasn't going to happen until I struck lucky with this space. It's a first floor, 30 square meter space within a Victorian building in a prominent location in the center of my local town. So I made some calls and arranged a viewing with the local estate agent. This is what the space looked like internally. Now you're probably thinking, it looks pretty tired, but looking past the red stained carpet and fluorescent tube lights, the space is really cool. It's got a curved external wall with 3 large Victorian sash windows, lots of natural light and huge potential with, just some minimal change of decoration and fixtures. So I was really excited with this space and decided to commit to a lease on very flexible terms that I'm delighted with. And upon getting the keys, there were a few things I wanted to do immediately. I changed the floor from red carpet to a vinyl tile in an oak effect and redecorated all of the walls. to bright white, allowing it to feel as light as possible, and created a feature wall in the dark green colour I had in my home studio, which is Valspar Blackmore Vale for anyone who's interested. And I changed the fluorescent tube lights to some black directional spotlights, which made a huge difference. This gave me a really good base to start designing the fit out of the space. So for the design, the first step was to do a measured survey. So I've measured up and created a dimensioned sketch, which has been translated into an AutoCAD drawing. And I've now imported that into Procreate to sketch over with some initial ideas. So I have 4 key requirements for my studio. The first is for 2 desk setups. So I need a permanent desk for myself, but I'd also love the opportunity to have a plug-and-play second desk, which can be used for friends, collaborators, and other creatives who I might invite to work from the studio on a flexible basis. To be honest, it'd be great to have some company because largely I'll be working here on my own. Secondly, I need a flexible layout table for all the activities that architects do on a daily basis, like laying out drawings and marking up revisions or making models and running client presentations. So I need a flexible table on wheels that can move around the studio. And thirdly, there's few architects that I've met that don't have an obsessive relationship with coffee, and I'm certainly one of those. So I want a coffee bar which has a good setup in the studio, as I'll be spending a lot of time here. And lastly, I need a making space that feels like I can create the models and physical output that I've been missing so much in my home office. So with that in mind, the very first thing I thought when I came into the space was, how cool could it be if we had a curved desk that wrapped around the wall and allowed me to provide 2 workspaces with monitors between the windows? But this quickly got discounted because I realized the windowsill height was too low, so the desk would be cutting through the windows, and the monitors would clutter up the masonry piers between the windows, and it would all just look a little clumsy. And actually, it just doesn't align with the reuse ethos of my own practice, as I'd be making that bespoke to this space, and if I ever moved studio or wanted to reuse it, it would be a challenge to do that. So that got discounted, and instead I thought, well, I already have a 2-meter long matte black worktop in my home office, so if I was to purchase another one of those, I could have a continuous desk space along the rear wall, which includes my permanent desk and a flexible collaborator's desk. And on the end, there's plenty of room for a cutting mat and my 3D printer. Another benefit of doing this is that there's a large feature wall above the monitors that could be used for storage and display. So I could store my 3D printer supplies, create a samples library perhaps, and who knows, maybe photographs of projects or physical model display. So with the feature wall and desks provided, the next thing I wanted to look at was the flexible layout table. If I could find a way of making a large format table on wheels, then that could exist centrally in the room. And for most of the time, I think it would dock up against the chimney breast. But if it was on wheels, then it could be pulled around close to the windows where I might want to work with natural light or take photographs of models. Or it could be pulled to the center of the room where I could run client presentations whilst talking back to a TV or projector on the chimney breast. So that could be a really flexible thing with a series of stools that slot underneath to become space efficient. Next up is acoustics. When I first came into the space, the tall ceilings, the large walls, and the curved plan meant the acoustic performance was really poor in the space. I do a lot of audio recording as part of these videos on Instagram and YouTube, and I really want a space that is suitable for that. So I need to find ways of introducing acoustic absorptive materials, but making those usable rather than just blank panels on walls. So when researching this, I was inspired by the work of Matthew Encina of Mod Musings, who I'll link in the description. Matthew made these large format pinup boards on wheels, which he moves around his own studio. And I was thinking if I was to make something similar that had a fabric front on it, then that could act as acoustic absorption. It could dock up against the TV for the most part, working to conceal that. But it could also slide to the side, allowing me to present physically and digitally at the same time, which is something I'd really like to do and avoid sole reliance on digital media. Lastly, there's a coffee bar, and that feels like it works very well in the niche next to the chimney breast. The niche is 350 millimeters deep, so I can get a shallow cabinet beneath it and a worktop over it where I can have a coffee machine and supplies with a series of shelves over it for display, perhaps. And this whole layout allows the windows to read as they were originally intended, maximizing natural light, and it feels like an efficient use of space in sketch form at least. And you'll see that I produced a 3D model in SketchUp with visuals created in Enscape to test how the space might look. And with that in mind, my next step is really to form a list of all of these materials and furniture and to price it up, because I really don't know how much all of this is going to cost. But all going well, I'll be able to go out and purchase all of the supplies so I can begin the build, which I'm super excited for.